going to show you something really interesting, and it's how the new corporate banking cartel governments of the world rely on and depend on our stupidity in order for them to get their assumed consent to operate over and above us. It's like a system where we become trustees or servants or slaves of their foreign banking cartel corporation. And what they say is that we are voluntary slaves, or voluntary servitude they call it. And voluntary servitude is the agreement to act as a slave. So it's a system, because a lot of us say in this new corporate system they can't understand how they have become subject to all these draconian laws. Farmers losing their lands, manufacturing in Australia has been decimated, the fishing industries, and like I say, the footwear, the clothing, all industries in our country have been destroyed and are in the process of being destroyed through policy that is a destructive policy that really leaves our nation floundering on an international scale. Now, this is all sort of planned in the Agenda 21 and the Agenda 30 thing, But tonight I'm going to show you one of the dirty tricks that they have used and deceived us as people, nationals of our own country, and rendered us as citizens of a foreign corporation that is usually subject or registered to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, D.C. So by becoming a citizen of the Commonwealth of Australia and the states such as State of Queensland, State of Victoria, State of New South Wales, etc., when we enter into citizenship of those states are registered corporations on the United States Securities and Exchange Commission in relation to the US Federal Reserve within Washington, D.C., which is the District of Columbia, which changes your standing, your legal standing and your political standing from being a national of Australia or a citizen from your own districts here in Australia to a citizen of a foreign district. And the reason how they do that is they just simply call the corporation or the company or the entity or the organisation Commonwealth of Australia. But of course, when you check, as you can see here, it is written in an all uppercase text, which is a hieroglyphic or Egyptian hieroglyphic text, and it is not English, not at all. So that's the first trick, by using a debased language, and which we've in past videos I've gone into this debased language when they're using it. But there's another really interesting trick that they use to get you to fall for this for their scam, their pyramid system. And look, they've got, in one way, they've got a point, because they've got approaching 7 billion people on this planet, which is 2018. And their story, or their reason for this, is that they need to control the masses through a military system, which means that when you're in the military, you don't have rights, you have a privilege, but you break the rules of that military ship, or that military organisation or corporation, and you are subject to the penalties that are already put in place, which really means that you're not subject to a fair trial or justice. It is if the higher ranking officer says you did something wrong, then you have done something wrong according to them. The accusation, it's not an accusation, it's a charge. They've bypassed the accusing bit where you have the right to go to a court and defend it. They give you that, what it's justice is seen to be done, but in actual fact, once you've been charged, the accusation has been assumed already, and then you have to fight that charge. And to enter into that system, you have to agree to be the citizen of their ship, you see. And once you agree to that and hold that birth certificate of their ship or their corporation, their foreign corporation, that's called Commonwealth of Australia or State of Queensland or State of Victoria or whatever, once you hold that birthing certificate of their foreign District of Columbia, then they can say, well, you applied for it, so therefore you agreed to enter into the ship and leave your own country. So therefore they call it voluntary servitude, where you agreed to enter into their foreign military ship, even though they called it Commonwealth of Australia and wrote it in debased Latin. The full disclosure, people say there's no full disclosure, but it is. The full disclosure is in the grammar, because when you know your grammar, you can look at the company and know it's not reading what it's assumed to be read. Remember, that law is a presumption of law. And the presumption, there's an old maxim that says the fact negates the presumption. It overrides or overrules the presumption. So the very minute a fact is recognised, then the presumption is no longer there. You have to think about some of these things sometimes, because a man is born, but he has the option of two births where he wants to dock his body through the dockmaster, which are the doctors who they can dock you into life and you're not dead until you've been docked out of life. But you have a choice of two births, the birth of the debtor and the birth of the creditor. That's your choice. Now, it starts with the birthing certificate. That's sort of where it all really begins. So when you get to 18 or whatever and you want to go and get a bank account and a driver license or anything, but usually it's a bank account. And they say, well, you'll have to go and apply for a license. You'll have to go and apply for a birth certificate. So you say, yeah, okay, I'll go and do that. So you walk into the courthouse, which is really, these days, before we go on with this story, birthing certificates are now housed in Australia in the CBA building at 180 Ann Street. The CBA building is the Commonwealth Bank of Australia building. All the birthing certificates were taken out of the government printing office at 110 George Street, which sure is already one evil looking building, as you can see here. The satanic the satanic symbols on this building are telling you something. But as you can see with the new building, it also houses a modern form of satanic symbolism. That's the snake or the vine that is on the building. And that comes from the old Roman god of Libor, which is the Roman god of wine, and the vineyards, which is the vines that creep through everything and attach themselves. A vine can't stand on its own legs. It has to be supported by something else. So back to our story. You walk into the court. Say, sir, you walk into the courthouse at the counter downstairs, wherever it is, and so I'd like to apply for a birth certificate. And I said, yes, by all means. We're going to need your name and your date of birth. And this is where it all starts. I say, what's your name? And you'll say, my name is John Henry Doe, which is really the Christian name and your surname attached as one name. That's what you will say. So they say, yes, no worries. Then you will say, they will ask you for your date of birth. So you will make another error and you will say, my date of birth is the date I was born. They say, yes, not a problem. So when you give the full name that included your surname or your last name, and you gave the date of birth that included your date of born, they give you this document here, which is called the State Birth Certificate. And you will walk out with that, and you'll take that around to the bank and say, look, I got my certificate. and they will know exactly what to do with that certificate. Because the information on this certificate gets this certificate. Now, when I went in and applied for my birth certificate, I did the same thing. I walked in happy as ever. Hello, how are you? To the girls at the court. And they said, yes, what can we do for you? And I said, I would like to apply for a birth certificate. And they said, well, we're going to need your name and your date of birth. And I said, yeah, no worries. So they said, well, what's your name? And I gave my name. That is, on the birth certificate, the state birth certificate, it says here, in this case, this is William Vaughan Izard, if he gave his full name. But on the birth certificate, and on yours, and on everybody's birth certificate, the only name that exists on this is William Vaughan, which is John Henry, the Christian name only. It is no surname attached to that name there. The surname is attached to your father and your mother. They have surnames, but you don't. So remember that. This is the evidence that your name is only, in this case, William Vaughan. In my case, Romilly Stewart. In the general trend, John Henry, not Doe. The John Henry name is there. So that's something that you've got to think about when you give your full name. Because if you give your full name as John Henry Doe, they will give you this. So I gave my full name. Would you like my full name? I said yes. They said, yes, we want your full name. I said, my full name is exactly what's on the birth certificate here, Romilly Stewart. I did not enter the John Henry Doe. I just entered the John Henry. So they didn't do anything. They just, have you got a date of birth? Now, it's very interesting because the word date is the key to this scam. Because the birth is the creation of an office, the birth of an office, or the birthing of a ship, the birthing of a corporate entity, the birthing of a corporation, an entity of some kind, an organisation. The date that is birthed, the date of registration of that, is the date of birth. So the word date refers to the date of the acknowledgement of the deed, and not the day the thing itself was created. So where you would have given your full name as John Henry Doe and your date of birth as the date you were born, I gave the Christian name and the date that it was registered up here. See that? That's the date of registration. That's the date that this certificate was stamped and entered into the court. On the certificate of birth, it has this information because it has in this box up the top here, name, which is the full name of the child, which is William Vaughan, the date he was born on the 22nd of April in 1953. But down here it says the date of registration, which in this case it was 8th of May 1953. So it was around a month after, a little over 1 month after, where this certificate, in his case, they created the proper certificate of birth. So on your birth certificate, your state birth certificate, it provides the information of your name, which is your full name, which is only your Christian name. It provides the date you were born, but it also provides the date of registration. The date of registration is the date of birth. Now remember, I'm the tin foil hat. I was the crazy one. I was the crazy one. Yet, legally and lawfully, all this information is here in full disclosure. They haven't hidden it. They haven't hidden anything. So, back to the court, I gave the date of birth as the registration date. They said, yep, no worries. Just got on the phone. We'll just ring the births, deaths and marriages, which instead of being at 110 George Street, it has changed to 180 Ann Street, Brisbane City. In the city, not Brisbane, but Brisbane City. And after about 7 seconds, she said, yes, sir, we have found your birth certificate. I said, oh, thank you very much. They said, would you like us to send it to you, to your ad address? I said, no. I said, you send it to the court. And I want nothing written on the back as stamped to who the Mr. is, to Mr. Doe. I just want you to send the certificate. So they called the Registrar General, David John. He should still be there as the Registrar General. He still is at 2018. And he got on the phone and he said, what would you like? And I said, I'd like you to send the birth certificate to the court and I will collect it over the counter. He said, yeah, that sounds fine. Gave it back to the girls. And I said, yep, no worries. So after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, the girls rang me up from the court and said, your birth certificate has arrived at the court. I said, thank you very much, I'll come in and get it. So that afternoon, I came into the court, walked into the court, and they had it still enclosed inside an envelope, a ledger. The envelope with the window on it, you know, the ones you get the bills in the mail. And I said, and it was addressed to the court. I said, I can't open this. This is addressed to the court. I would be violating Section 85Q and 85N, I think it is, of the Crimes Act 1914, which is a 10-year imprisonment for interfering with another person's mail. So I said, this is addressed to you. You can only open this. I can't do that. So they said, oh, okay, well, do you mind if we open it? I said, no, you open it. So they opened it, and then they pulled out, not this, they pulled out that. Now, even the girls at the court said to me, what's that? I said, that's a birth certificate. That's the certificate of birth that you get when you know your name and your date of birth. If you don't know your name and your date of birth, they will make you up a birth certificate and treat you as a debtor of their estate. But when you apply for this one, you become the creditor of their bank, their state. I mean, it used to be the government, but because Australia doesn't have a government anywhere, the banking system has taken over. The Rothschilds owns the US Federal Reserve and the Australian Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve of Australia. That one bank owns all of them. So that one bank has now become the government of all of the registered companies registered with the US SEC, which would even include like Britain as well, Australia, New Zealand, probably even the United States. They've all been put as companies with the United States Federal Reserve Bank. And that is so that the whole world can use that currency of that bank. That's like on the internet. I mean, it's got its good points, because you can now world trade with a currency, even though that the Australian currency and the US dollar and the euro, they're different currencies or have different values, but they all interlock in through the United States Federal Reserve Bank. That's where they're eventually going to try and bring in a one world currency. But that currency, in the Australian Constitution, it says that only the government has the right to coin the money. But this money has been coined or created by the US Federal Reserve, which is a foreign deity, a foreign account, a foreign nation. But by joining that nation, that's getting into an act of treason or treachery against their own nation. But we didn't know that, because they called the Queensland Queensland government, or the Queensland government, or the state of Queensland, when they registered that corporate name, State of Queensland and Queensland Treasury Corporation, and in Australia's case, the Commonwealth of Australia, when they registered that name as a company name with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, that did not mean Commonwealth of Australia. And because they wrote that text in an all uppercase hieroglyphic illustrative text, which is pictures and patterns. It is not a descriptive text. It's not proper English. It's not the common language. It's a foreign language. Because they wrote the Commonwealth of Australia in a foreign language, it did not read the Commonwealth of Australia. So, in my case, when I held this certificate of birth instead of this, then it changed my political stand from being in the state of the plebs or the plebeians, which is the pagans, the pagans, which are the debtors or the trustees of the bank. I became the beneficiary or the patrician of the bank. And what happens when the Prime Minister swears his oath to serve the people of the nation and not the persons, then what he's saying is he serves these people, which is the creditors of the bank. But the thing is, if the bank, the Commonwealth of Australia Bank or the US Federal Reserve, can fool everybody into holding this certificate as a trustee of the bank and not as a creditor, but as the debtor of the bank, then that places the bank itself, if these people aren't here, then that places the bank as the one being protected by the state and being defended by the armies. The armies, the courts, the government are defending the bank. They are really defending the creditors in the bank. But to be the creditor, you must know how to get the certificate, the certification, the proof, the evidence that you are the creditor and not the debtor. Now, when you are in a court and the magistrate sings out, "Is John Henry Doe in the courtroom?" He sings that name out because that's not your name, that's his name. And what he's waiting for is someone to walk in and claim his name, to believe that it's your name. And of course, those people believe their name is John Henry Doe instead of just John Henry, which is the only evidence. There's no evidence of you being John Henry Doe. But on the certificate of birth, strangely enough, the full name John Henry Doe, or in this case William Vaughan Izard, does exist in the margin of the certificate of birth. But what it says here that my full name, dead, which is a cross, dead Christian name of child, is Romilly Stewart, not Romilly Stewart and the surname. It's just Romilly Stewart. That's the given name. In this case, it would be William Vaughan. But in the margin is a very interesting piece of data. It says in here that I, David John, Registrar General, do hereby certify that this is a true photographic copy of a certificate of birth for John Henry Doe, the full name here, written as a proper noun, not as all uppercase text, but as a proper person, in my custody at the Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages, and Brisbane. And I further certify that I have been declared an approved person in terms of section 105 of the Evidence Act 1977 to 1990. This is the proof that that's his name. Now, when you claim his name, we may be able to use that name as the creditor. But when the magistrate sings out your name is John Henry Doe in there, he sings out his name, he's singing out this name because he owns it and he needs someone to act as the debtor. Because if you don't walk in and claim that name, then the magistrate has got to pay the debts because he owns John Henry Doe. It's a really dirty trick. And the thing is, it's dangerous for the bank because if the people start to work this out, as you can see, every debt, all the money that the bank has lent out may have to pay you back for your house loans, for everything that you've paid for the bank. That may have to be returned. And that's dangerous stuff. You can see why I've gone through so much hassle and threats and everything when I went to the police and said, we've got a problem here. We've got, there's something going wrong, but we've lost our real government of our country because our birth certificates are no longer in the printing offices, the government printing office. They're in another bank, the Commonwealth of Australia Bank, which is registered with the United States Securities Exchange, and it is certainly not registered with the Queen or Britain. Or does the Queen own the District of Columbia? I don't know. I mean, that's we can go further with that. But that's what's happened. I hold this certificate, and because it is a political stand, these are two poles. This is a house or an office of the debtor, the office of administration, and this is the office of the creditor. So the birth relates to when this office was created. The name of the person that's in there is simply the beneficiary. We are either the beneficiary of the house of the creditor, or if we remain in the surname, holding the surname of the birth certificate, we still become the beneficiary, but we become the beneficiary of a debtor state. So you're still nothing's changed inside, but it's just that if you're the beneficiary of an office of a debtor, then that office is going to completely always be empty because it's going over to pay the creditors. So if you are in the office of the debtors, then you will be forever paying the debts of that state. If you are in the office of the creditors, then your debts are constantly being paid by the office of the debtors. That's why when you walk into a courthouse to apply for your birth certificate, that's the one they need you to apply for. That's why the society, they advertise your birthday and celebrate your birthday, because they're celebrating the day that you entered into the birth of the debtors. They created this birth on the same day you were born, because on the day you were born, they quickly tied this tag to your surname, John Henry Doe, the Doe bit. They tied to your heel or to your toe, and they created the office of the debtor first. Now, normally you will stay in the office of the debtors, which is normal, until you reach the age of 21, which is the age of majority. And at the age of majority, you have the right to come back to being a Christian, a true court Christian, not a quasi-Christian, but a true court Christian, or the patrician. You have that right at the age of 21. Or you have, if you don't come back to Christ or in the Christian trust or into the creditor trust, and you remain with the house of the debtors, then you become a thing called an adulterer, or they also call them adults, which is adult. So that means that's a person that no longer believes in Christ, in the creditor. That's a pagan, which really means pay again. So what's happening is you're paying for all your debts again. But the thing is, when you're in here, because you are the one that owns the birthright to the land that you're born on. You own the land. It's like those farmers are getting kicked off the land. How can a farmer get kicked off the land when we as Australians own the land? And that's really easy. They hold this certificate here, which is the evidence that the court needs and the bank needs to prove that you are not the holder of land of Australia. You are in the office of the creditor of a company in the District of Columbia. And then that's why they call you a resident, which is someone that resides on the land. The word resident means someone that lives on land they don't own. So you've got to be careful of all these things. Same with the traditional blackfellas from this land, from this country. They call themselves the traditional owners, but they've got to watch what that word means, because the word traditional means one who has given or sold his land, given away or sold his land. So sometimes it's not about, there's a bit more to this than meets the eye. It's also the birthright of not just the original blackfella tribes that were on this land. It's people like me and 3 or 4 generations of my history that also now have a birthright to Australia. This is my only country. I love Australia just as much as anybody, and I have a birthright here. So that means that I have an obligation, just like the original blackfella tribes. We are obligated to serve and protect and defend this country. But the thing is, this attack has been a silent attack, not only just on the original blackfella tribes when the white tribe, when the right administration came here. This is also an attack on the white birthright, the white people that have been birthed on this country as well. And what these foreign banks, these Vatican-owned banks, are doing is they are usurping this thing over the birthright, the people that have been born on this country, and they use our birthright, our ownership of the mineral and the energy wealth of Australia. They use that ownership through this certificate as the security to make their money with. When they produce their dollars, their Federal Reserve notes that we use and think is money, it's not. That money is being printed off this certificate. And what happens is, this is the real certificate. This is you. This is the birthright. This is what gives the legal title to the bank. This gives you the equitable title. So the minute that they can remove you from here and go put you over into the debtor's office, then that makes the bank then holding the equity, because the true equitable holder that is not there. He's gone over into the debtors, but he doesn't know he's there. He thinks he's a creditor. He thinks he's the real thing. But the very birthing certificates themselves, when you just get in and read them and look closely at what's happening with them, the full disclosure is actually on these certificates. On this one too. And the real full disclosure is that both of these certificates are fraud. They are banking frauds. But do we have to get rid of it yet? You know, if the bank is doing all the right things and we become the creditors of the bank, well, then the bank is doing all the work for us. The foreign United States Federal Reserve works for us, just like our prime ministers say when they sign their oath, when they go into the Governor General's office and swear their oath. They swear an oath to serve the people. That's who they serve. But if these people are over here, then they are actually serving the bank. Becomes from, there's the equitable title. This is the evidence that we've granted it to the bank as the administrator. The administrator then grants it back to us, because we walk into the court, we don't know who we are. And name and date of birth, yeah, John Henry Doe and date born. Yeah, come in, Spinner. And they give you, here's a nice new shiny birth certificate. Look at this, got nice fadey looking stuff on it. How's that? And you think, oh, great. And you can go down to the bank now and you can borrow money as long as you pay it back, because you have to pay it back to yourself. But if you're not here, you still remain there. When you pay the money back to yourself and you borrow it from your house, you borrow your house loan, you take the money. As you're paying it back to the bank takes your money and it does pay it back to you over here. But when you finally die and you didn't ever come back here to claim your money, then all that money that you've paid back, that they've taken from your account, remains with the US Federal Reserve, which is the Rothschild dynasty. And that's probably a little bit why they have so much wealth. Something like 9/10 of the money in the world belongs to them. I've heard these stories, which is an amazing amount of wealth. But it's not that they've made the wealth or anything, they've just simply deceived. And you know, it's not technically stolen. But if they've set up a society that doesn't allow you to ever know the difference between, or the tricks on how they've done this. If you don't know the art of conversion, which is converting you from the creditor of a bank into a debtor of the bank, by letting you become an account holder of the bank, which is a trustee. If you don't know these things, and I've made sure that in the schools, the state schools and everything, that you don't have the ability to know this, then you will always grow up in the world of the debtors, and you will never know anything else. You will never know that this other certificate exists. And to get it, how easy is it to get it? If you know your name and your date of birth, that's all you do. Name, John Henry, not John Henry Doe. Date of birth, the date of registration, or down here, the registration date, which is that date up there, which is the date of registration. So that's the fundamental, that's where the guts of this, you could almost call it a crime, but the thing is, they call it voluntary because you volunteered after you turned 21. You didn't come over here. And because it's a biblical trust, the system exists in the Bible. So they sort of say to us, they call us pagans, and that's the other reason why there is a Bible sitting in the court, is to remind us that the pagans are going to be punished in there. It's satanic in all ways. The Bible is the manual to Babylon. It's a Babylonian manual. So like a car manual, or your manual for your mower or your motorbike, you got to read the manual to make sure that you do everything right, to put the right oils in your engine and all this, in order not to void warranty. Well, the same thing with the Bible. It's a manual, and if you don't operate within the terms, you'll wind up in the pagan